So good afternoon to you again, and thank you very much for being here. My name is Allison Brown. I'm a civil rights attorney, and my focus is equity in public education. I am the president of Allison Brown Consulting, ABC. I'm a former attorney of the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division's Educational Opportunity Section, where we enforce those laws that relate to civil rights and education and monitor schools' compliance with those laws. I'm thrilled to be here today with this esteemed panel of experts on where we are in this movement. I first want to take the opportunity to thank the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers for putting together this panel. And I want to introduce our first speaker who will frame the conversation for us. Dr. Loretta Johnson is the American Federation of Teachers Secretary-Treasurer, and she'll give us some opening tidbits. Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon. On behalf of our 1.5 million AFT members across the country, I want to thank all of you for being here today. And one thing we all can agree upon is no matter where we come from or what our political beliefs, is that our children deserve the best education we can possibly give them. Today, we have wonderful public schools for some, but not for all. In many of our communities, schools have been underfunded, understaffed, and overburdened for decades. Families, students, and teachers and school staffs are asking for help. And they also are telling us something that the AFT already know. Closing schools is not the answer. I come from Baltimore, and 10 years ago, we were understaffed, underpaid, underfunded. And in Baltimore City, we made a turnaround in our educational system by recommitting ourselves to education, putting the funds that was needed into the city. And our school system has changed. It's come up to be one of the #1 school systems in Maryland. It makes a difference when we care. The students who attend these schools, the parents who send them there, and the teachers and staff who work there, they feel the pain most deeply. The evidence is clear. Disruptive interventions like school closures and takeovers simply don't work. In the academic world, a 2012 report by the National Educational Policy Center found no support for this approach. In the real world, we look at cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, and see with our own eyes that this approach does not work. And it's no surprise that the majority of those who are affected by those school closures are from working class communities and poor communities of color. This is very much a civil rights issue. That is why we consistently call the attention the additional options that actually fix schools based on proven strategies we know that have worked successful to turn around and strengthen schools. It simply destabilizes and disrupts school communities without addressing the real problems that created barriers to student success. Today, I'm excited to discuss this problem and this esteemed panel that we have here this afternoon. If we truly want to improve schools, we must move beyond searching for quick fixes. Instead, look for implemented, proven programs and solutions. When parents, teachers, school staff, students, and community members work together, and we provide with adequate resources, we can make every public school a place where parents want to send their kids, where teachers want to teach, and where students want to learn. I thank you for this opportunity, and please give a round of welcome to our next speaker, Becky Pringle, Secretary-Treasurer of the National Education Association. And by the way, the AFT and NEA is agreeing on this, and we're working totally together to make changes in our schools.
That's right, that's right. Thanks, Loretta. Thank you, Loretta. And that was a really powerful video, and it represents all of the work that our educators are doing across this country. You're going to be hearing from some of them this morning or this afternoon. And so it is my great pleasure on behalf of our President, Dennis Van Rokel, and the 3 million plus members of the National Education Association to welcome you here this afternoon. As Loretta said, we are working on this together in a cooperative, collaborative manner, because we know we can't do this by ourselves. We can't do it by ourselves in the education community. It's why we have such a diverse panel here. And we certainly can't individually, the NEA or the AFT, do it by ourselves. We have to join together to get this work done. We know that quality public education has the power to change lives, and not just individual lives, but communities and nations. We know that. But as 50 million American students went back to school this month, the experience that they had as they entered their classrooms was vastly different, because we really have 2 school systems. And it's unfortunate to say they are most often separate, and they are unequal. Most students return to schools with well-trained teachers and who that were able to individualize their instruction and hold expectations high for them. They had computers, and they had iPads, and they had whiteboards. They had science labs. They had well-equipped gyms. They had plenty to eat and a safe place to live and to learn. But sadly, millions of our students, the ones Loretta talked about, who live in poverty and unfortunately all too often are Black and brown students, their reality was very different. Many of their teachers didn't have the experience or professional certification. Classrooms were crowded and dilapidated. These students lacked supplies, often lacked health care and nutrition, everything they needed to be successful learners. The latest issue of our NEA Today magazine, cute little girl on the front, and the title says, "What's her number?" And as you look at these numbers, what you see are zip codes. The quality of our kids' education should not be determined by the zip code they live in. But I can tell you that closing our schools in our communities, that's not the answer. Resourcing them, that's the answer. Rebuilding our communities and leveraging their assets, that's the answer. Caring about and nurturing every child, that's the answer. Holding expectations high for them, and then providing them with the supports they need to be successful, that's the answer. We must fight like hell against corporate reformers, posers, hijacking the conversation with absolutely no interest in doing what's right for our kids. That's our responsibility. But let me tell you this afternoon, that's why I'm so glad this panel is here. We can't just fight against them. We've got to fight for better resources, for better trained teachers and other support professionals working in our schools, for better standards, for better assessments, for better resources and better schools. And we need every single caring adult, every one of them, to fight for access and opportunity and for justice and equality. We have to demonstrate to all that we know better and that we will do better. So I'm going to ask you this afternoon to channel your inner Tyler Perry Medea and say, hell to the yes, because our kids deserve nothing less. But in the end, Mother Teresa reminds us that duty comes from knowing the need to take action and not just urge others to do so. So it's not just about what the AFT is doing, or the NEA is doing. It's about what the National Urban League is doing, and Dr. Malveaux is doing. And Allison, thank you so much for all you're doing to hold this country accountable for the civil rights laws that have been enacted. It's about what everyone in this room is willing to do. So let me thank you for all I know you will do. I know you're going to listen deeply. You're going to take away some really good ideas, and then you are going to act. So thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. Take notes and take action. Thanks.
We'll let the church say. That was fantastic. Thank you both so much. It is my great honor at this point to introduce to you this wonderful panel. As we've seen on the video and heard already today, there is a school reform train that is rolling, and it is rolling in too many instances right over our children. And we have got to work together to prevent that train from doing any more damage. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There is a movement afoot, and that movement has been driven in large part by educators of color who have stepped forward to say, these policies won't work. We're not going to allow you to dictate to us what we're going to do in the classroom and how we will serve our children. And so I'm really excited to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Julianne Malveaux is an economist, author, and commentator whose popular writings have appeared in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, The Progressive, and many more. She also served as the 15th president of Bennett College for Women in North Carolina. Currently, she serves on the boards of the Economic Policy Institute, the Recreation Wish List Committee of Washington, D.C., and the Liberian Education Trust. She is also the founder of Last Word Productions Incorporated, a multimedia production company that serves as a vehicle for her work and her products. Susie Saavedra is Senior Legislative Director at the Urban League, and she supports the Urban League's stated goals to provide quality, accessible health care, and education that prepares children for college work and life. She also leads the Education and Healthcare Affiliate Task Force groups, helping Urban League CEOs stay abreast of national policy developments and offering counsel on the implications at the state level and providing technical assistance so they can advocate for their interests at the state and local level. Lanita Dominique has been an educator for the last 15 years in the Southern California area. She has worked as a supervisor at a residential treatment facility with children who were wards of the state, and she is now a 5th grade multiple subject teacher. She's an active member of her local Teachers Association and the California Teachers Association. And though she has held a plethora of positions in the organizations that she's worked with, she is the immediate past president of the Adelanto District Teachers Association and was at the helm when the recent parent trigger crisis unfolded in Adelanto, California. Jesse Hagopian teaches history and is the Black Student Union Advisor at Garfield High School in Seattle, Washington, the site of the historic boycott of the Measures of Academic Progress Standardized Test, or MAP, this year. Jesse is an associate editor for the acclaimed Rethinking Schools magazine. He's a founding member of Social Equality Educators, SEE. He was the recipient of the 2012 Abe Keller Foundation Award for Excellence and Innovation in Peace Education and a 2013 Secondary Teacher of the Year nominee by the Academy of Education, Arts, and Sciences. He is also a contributing author to the 101 Changemakers, a community organizer, and a regularly requested public speaker. And finally, last but not least, Ms. Stacey Davis Gates is the Political and Legislative Director of the Chicago Teachers Union, AFT Local 1. She was a classroom educator for 12 years before joining the CTU. As the Political and Legislative Director, she works to ensure that public educators, students, and their families have a strong voice in the policy-making process. In addition to leading the political and legislative agendas for the CTU, Stacey is a regular contributor to radio shows and print publications. So thank you all so much for being here. I want to start with a question. We want to talk mostly about school closures today. So I wonder if you would just talk about the implications in your area of mass school closures, and Dr. Malveaux, if you would frame it from an economic perspective, national economic standpoint.
Well, thank you. As our distinguished leaders here have said to us today, this is a national movement. It's a national movement that demonizes teachers by suggesting that teachers are not doing a good enough job without looking at the fact that teachers do not necessarily always have enough resources. So you get a spiral where first of all, the population of cities declines. But then secondly, the school population declines, not because a city population is declining, but because cities subsidize non-public education. And when they choose to subsidize non-public education, they put the public school system at a competitive disadvantage. When you look at certain school systems, New Orleans came through Katrina with fewer public schools than they had when they started. The move was on from the governor's office to create alternative education. If you look at Michigan right now, what you'll see is that they have an emergency manager who has fast-tracked bankruptcy. This man can do anything he wants. He goes over the mayor, he goes over the city council, he can close schools, he can do anything he wants because he was appointed by the governor, and basically, so you see the push. He started talking which of our institutions are efficient institutions. Now, all of us know that this movement is partially being driven by Michelle Rhee, who spent some time here in Washington, D.C., and then was rewarded by corporate interests with multi-million-dollar grants to push her agenda for private school, for private and charter schools. What people may not know is that Ms. Rhee was a spectacular failure here in Washington, D.C. On her way out, she said, I've done all these things, I've done all these things. Retrospectively, they're finding that teachers under her leadership were cheating on these standardized tests, that the scores did not go up as much as people said they did. As a matter of fact, there is no proof whatsoever that a charter or private school, inner city private school, does better than a public school. Now, you're going to get outliers on either side. You're going to find a charter school that is fantastic, and everybody will tell that story. But they won't tell the story of the charter school that is pitiful, because then they balance out. You find public schools that are fantastic, even in inner cities, but you'll find some that are pitiful. And again, it's a function of, these are outliers. Let's look in the middle. And if you look at the averages, what you see is that unlike the demonization stories, you see people doing the best with what they have. Tell you a story. I had, when I was president at Bennett, I heard about a young sister who was going to the military, which I thought was just ridiculous. So that's my political bias. But I'm like, sister, there are options. So we fast-tracked her admission. I fast-tracked most of it, got her transcripts, and then my admissions people, who wouldn't let me do whatever I wanted, although I was their boss, but they would always say, okay, we have to have a file. So I needed a recommendation from a counselor. I could not track one down. Now, it was the summer, but I literally couldn't track one down. I found out that the lady was one of my sorors, so I called her at home and said, I just need this recommendation. So we started chatting. This woman says, I have 900 students assigned to me. She is a 12th grade counselor. We want our young people to go to college. How do you do that with 900 students assigned to one person? I think it's a miracle that any of her young people were able to get to college. And this is a challenge that we have. We have schools, as Becky has said, that are under-resourced. The dollars are simply not there. And then you're sort of told, do the best with what you have. And people do the best with what they have, but it isn't enough. Now, the school closing movement, we've had some schools close here in D.C. and all over the country. The rationale is that, number one, you have fewer schools, fewer students in these schools. Number two, the schools that are in the least physical condition, the worst physical condition, are the ones that you should close. What schools are in the worst physical condition? The schools in the inner city, because y'all have not maintained them. These schools just did not get raggedy on their own. The windows did not break themselves. The janitor who was coming did not get the work order. Let's just talk about this. So then when you decide that you're going to have a hierarchy of which schools close, you close the ones that are least well-maintained first. Where are those schools? We know what the maintenance issues are. So this is almost set up to fail. We're going to take your schools away because they're raggedy. They're raggedy because we didn't maintain them, but we take no responsibility in that. Now, once those schools are closed, you place enormous burdens on the parents and the young people. Schools that, whether they function at the best or not, schools are institutions in communities. One of the things that I spent a year in Moss Point, Mississippi, don't ask me why. And my aunt had taught every person in the 5th grade right now from probably age 50 to about age 90. She was in that school system for 40 years. So she taught everybody. Everyone talks about Miss Randall. Miss Randall was an institution. When you went to college, Miss Randall had a little $100 bill wrapped up for you. But this lady was, so you came to her class, now your brother comes, and you're not going to act right. Oh, no, that's not going down. So these people are institutions. Now, no, we bus you across town or don't bus you across town, because high school students usually have to get where they're going on their own. So we move the schools over to the better neighborhoods. We bus you across town, or I guess that, or get you to get across town yourself. You're crossing gang lines. You're doing a number of other things that imperil you. In addition, you have less mobility and less access. You may be the 12th grader who comes home to watch the 9th grader. You may be providing some services to your family. Now it's going to take you longer to get back there. You're going by schools that you used to attend, to go to a school that you're unfamiliar with teachers that you're unfamiliar with. Basically, the privatization movement sells you basically a bag of tricks. Essentially, they say, we're better, we're going to do better, and if you look at their rates, you find that they don't. In addition, they're able to do a pernicious kind of creaming. So the young people who have behavioral problems, partially because of the schools they've been moved to, are kicked out after 2 or 3 offenses. Now, these are young people who act out. That's what young people do. It's unfortunate, but that's just a fact of life. You don't find any 60-year-old men in jail unless they've been there forever. Because the 60-year-old men don't act out. 20-year-old men act out. 60-year-old men know better. But in any case, you see these young people acting out, and with these private schools, you have 0 tolerance. It's 3 strikes or 2 strikes, or how many ever strikes you have, you're out. So I have a young woman that I've been mentoring who has been put out of 3 charter schools heretofore. Always, now she has a few issues, but, she does have issues. But at the same time, you have teachers with no tolerance. You have teachers, she just has a big mouth. Well, I was mentoring her, so this kind of explains all this. And she talks back a lot. And I've always told her not to be intimidated by anyone. And if you have a question, ask the question. But some of these teachers are not open to questions. In addition, some of their historical curriculum does not reflect the African American or other history. And so when the teacher said something about slavery, she said, Dr. Malveaux said, she was out. But basically, we're looking at different norms. Finally, I think when we talk about neighborhood schools, we talk about the benefits that you have to neighborhood schools. And we also want to talk about the people who have roles and voices in neighborhood schools. We also want to talk about what neighborhood schools contribute to the overall economy of neighborhoods, not only in terms of the people who are hired, but often in terms of the contracts that they're able to make, often to local institutions, and that all of that becomes obviated when you go to the charter system or even the private school system. So we're talking about educational equity, which I know that you work on, Allison, but we're also talking about quantifying some of this, and we're talking about looking at what schools are being closed and why. Well, it's interesting to me here in DC that many of the schools that are being closed are east of the river. For those of you who are not from DC, that's where the Black people live. East of the river, those schools are being closed, but schools are being relocated west of the river, where you already have an adequate number of decently maintained schools. So really the burden is just on the child who has to move. The burden is not on anybody else, but the child has to move and the parent who has to move around. Because again, we see all this data about parental involvement. Well, parental involvement is minimized when the school is very much difficult to get to as opposed to a neighborhood school. So again, what I would say to contextualize this is a response that we have to have. Number one is to closing dilapidated schools as opposed to repairing dilapidated schools. We have the resources in our cities to repair. We choose not to. We unevenly divide resources as well as unevenly divide good teachers. So the good teacher should go to the good school where they have the good students, and the less prepared teacher, because I don't think there are any bad teachers. I think some are prepared and some are less prepared. And the less prepared teachers can go to the school where the students need good teachers more. And so we have to basically make sure that we talk about what are the perceived deficiencies, and how those deficiencies can be managed. Fixing the schools, training the teachers, in some cases offering teachers sabbaticals. And I hope you sisters will get on. You can burn out in some of these schools.
Amen.
And basically after 7 years, just as an academe, you get a year.
Yes.
Maybe you get 6 months to go explore something, sharpen your saw, pick up another language, do something. But many of our teachers simply burn out. And we simply don't look at that as part of the contract issue. So look at what's broken and fix it, but also then look at what the impact is on families and parents. And finally, I think that more people need to collect data on charter effectiveness. There is some data out there, but there's not enough, and we know that charter schools are simply not effective than public schools. So if there is a reason why someone wants to go to a private school, fine. But we know that even with the growth of charter and public schools, charter and private schools, forgive me, that 85% of our nation's youth still go to public schools. So this is the greatest deliverer of education, is public schools. We can't let Michelle Rhee win. Teachers cannot be demonized. One of the things we know is that African-American women, women, first of all, the dominant number of teachers, but this has been a historic profession for African-American women. African-American women's organizations, the sororities, Delta Sigma Theta, and Alpha Kappa Alpha, I had to put it in order. And the other sororities have, from a baseline perspective, delivered with educational supplements and with other things. So at some way, the attack on public schools is an attack at some level on women and on black women. And again, this is not just a school movement. The Star of the Beast people, the Tea Party people, want to shrink the size of government. They're going through here, they want to privatize assets, they want to privatize some of the services that are provided. In Detroit, they want to sell the water system. They want to make sure that things are privatized to shrink, they call it shrink the beast, but really shrink the size of government. And the charter movement is also a movement to get the public sector out of the public schools. Thank you.
So that there's nothing else to be said, actually, because I think it was all said very eloquently. So I guess where I'll pick up is where Dr. Malveaux left out. The attack on public accommodation is an attack on black people. Through the schools, they are attacking our black children, our black teachers. In Chicago, where I am from, where I spent time in the classroom in a school that closed, so I'm a failing teacher, as the narrative goes. And I spent time at a school that received students from a closing school as well. So what we find in Chicago is that black women who populated the hallways of these schools are no longer there. They're being pushed out wholesale and blamed for the failures of our children. Black children. The reason why they even started in the profession to begin with was to educate these black children. This is a vicious cycle and a terrible joke on what gains we made throughout the civil rights movement. So when people talk about reform, it's kind of funny to me that you're trying to reform something that had been reformed and actually at work. So if we go back to Lyndon Baines Johnson, the Great Society, and we couple that with ESA, 1965, and then we fast forward to the late 80s when you could actually see the achievement gap narrowed between our children and white children. We know this. We have more African American students, Latino students, poor students going to college and graduating from college than ever in the history of America under the gains of these. So this is the lesson that we take away from this, that it's not just about supplying the school building, but it's making sure that healthcare is accessible. It is making sure that housing is affordable. It is making sure that mom and dad have an opportunity to produce a decent wage for their children. So it's the whole family, it is the whole community, and the school is the anchor in that community. So we see in Chicago now, public housing is no longer. We've segued into mixed income housing, and now we know that that too has slowed. We closed 50 schools, but then we open RFPs for charter schools. We shut down the main artery from the south side into the city, what's called the red line in the city, right? And we create an environment where we cannot succeed even when we try. So who do you hold accountable? Well, they tell us it's our children, because the test scores say that they're not learning. And so black teacher, then it's your fault. But in actuality, these are policies. This is legislation. This is law that codifies our oppression. Like I tell everybody when I speak, is that my oppression as a black woman has always been legal in America. This is nothing any different. We think because people are marching in the streets and that we cannot not identify Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, that we are not still in a movement, that our oppression is still not real, that racism is still not what it is. But it is. Anytime you close down half the schools in Kansas City, you disinvest and close them in Philadelphia, and then you come to Chicago and do the same thing. Like Dr. Malveaux said, you have an emergency manager in Flint, in Benton Harbor, and Detroit. All predominantly African-American cities that have been disinvested in. There is something wrong. Oh yeah, did I forget voting rights?
Yeah.
This is a design, and our children are being held in the clutches of this design. And we have to recommit, as citizens of this country who vote, by the way, to holding elected officials accountable who codify this racism and policy. Thank God for Eric Holder, who said mandatory minimums, the outcomes of that have been detrimental to the black community and the black family. We need Eric Holder to take over the Department of Education. Because right now, Race to the Top is doing absolutely nothing but exacerbating the very issues that it purports to solve. And that's our fault, because we have not elected the people and put them in place, and then after we elect them, hold them accountable for the things. So like she said, I'm political and legislative. So this is what I do all day. I get to go around and tell people who are elected by our constituents, who we help to support, yo, you're really not doing your job. And this is how you're not doing your job. Anytime you can close 50 schools on the south and west side of Chicago, how do you expect to be reelected? No one's gonna live there. They shut down the projects. There was your voting block right there. Now they're shut down all of the neighborhood schools in your area. They're gentrifying like crazy. They're not going to want you representing them. So this is a total design. This is a whole design on our society. And I think that we really and truly have to be very purposeful about how we attack the legislation, how we attack the laws that continue our oppression. And we go straight to No Child Left Behind. So when we had campaigns in 2008, and they were excoriating No Child Left Behind and how the penalty phase of it has not necessarily helped. Well, let's back up. We put Race to the Top in, which is just a rewarm Renaissance 2010 from the Chicago public school system, which basically placed school closings right out there for everyone to see, and has not helped in the outcomes, not in the least. In fact, what we know about school closings in Chicago is that students lose at least 2 years of their education with the disruption. What we know about school closings is that once these kids are segued into these receiving schools, they receive police escorts, they receive helicopter escorts, they receive fire department escorts to the next school because it's so unsafe. That was our first day of school in Chicago in August. I walk outside and there's a helicopter, a police helicopter over my head because I still live in the hood. Following children to school. You would think that we were still in Little Rock, Arkansas. In 2013, we are still having the same conversation about equity. It's nothing wrong with the people who are maintaining the power system. It's something about the people who don't realize that their oppression is real.
So Jesse, I want to, if you would, I wonder if you would just in about 2 minutes, so we can make sure we get to audience questions. Will you just talk about your experience with the MAP test and how that got going and what was the result?
Yeah. Well, first let me just say it's great to be back in Washington, D.C. This is where I got started teaching east of the river at Henley Elementary School. And what you said about the conditions, I had a work order in for hole in my ceiling to be fixed for 3 years. The first assignment I ever assigned to my students was destroyed because the rain came in and washed out their posters that they'd done on their heroes from American history. And I came in on Monday, there's standing water on the ground, so I just wheeled a garbage can up to that hole, and that's how I dealt with it for the 3 years. But I come to speak to you all today from Seattle. I teach at the great Garfield High School, where I graduated from, and the home of Jimi Hendrix and Quincy Jones. And thank goodness those great creative minds weren't inundated with standardized tests, and their creativity was able to be unleashed. Or Macklemore, if you have seen the cover of Rolling Stone recently, is one of our very own from Garfield. And this is a school that's always believed in nurturing the whole child. And this year, that really showed itself in a whole different way. We're famous for our jazz band scoring big victories in the national competitions, and this was a different kind of victory that we had at Garfield. It was a victory for solidarity and a victory, I think, for teaching the whole child. And we held a meeting in our library after school where we debated whether we might decide to refuse to give one of the district-mandated standardized tests. And we talked about how this test was robbing our kids of precious class time. They get pulled out, taken down to the library 3 times a year. Our libraries are shut down for weeks at a time, so kids can't do research, they can't get to the books. We talked about how this test wasn't aligned to our curriculum. So, for instance, the math teachers were telling us that the 9th grade geometry or 9th grade algebra teachers are seeing geometry questions on the test, which is like if you're a Spanish teacher and you're seeing French questions on, okay, yeah, it's foreign language, but it's a different subject, and you're going to grade me as an educator on a test that's not aligned to our standards. So we took a vote, and the entire staff voted unanimously to refuse to give this test. And it wasn't that we were against accountability. We actually, as educators and believers in civil rights, we want accountability because we want someone to be accountable for educating, especially our students of color, our black students who have been historically neglected. It's just that we can't have accountability with a flawed test, and we can't have accountability with standardized testing as the only way to measure what's important, right? The ability to eliminate wrong answer choices is one type of knowledge, but there is a whole other realms of knowledge that are not assessed by these tests. We talked about that. We also talked about who's going to be accountable for poverty in America, the main barrier to the success of many of our students. And so we announced that we refuse to give this test and waste our students' time and our precious resources of our district, and it was absolute chaos. The superintendent threatened us with a 10-day suspension without pay. And when that happened, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen occurred at Garfield High School, which was an entire staff losing their fear. And maybe you've seen videos of the civil rights movement, or maybe some of you have participated in it, and that understanding that, you know what, whatever the consequences are, this is worth it. And every threat that was leveled against us, our staff only stood up straighter. And as thousands of emails and phone calls and flowers and letters of support came streaming in to us, we knew that this wasn't just about Garfield, and this wasn't just about this one map test. This was about an entire system of education that's being eroded and corrupted by standardized testing. So we saw this movement spread across the country. There were walkouts against the tests in Portland and Chicago. 8,000 parents in Long Island opted their kids out of the test. 10,000 parents in Texas were marching against these tests. And what what became known the education spring last spring, as people really took to the streets against these types of tests. And I just want to wrap up by saying that, you know, they push standardized testing. It's the lifeblood of their system, of this whole corporate education reform system. It's what Michelle Rhee bases all of her reforms on, and she freaked out and wrote an op-ed to the Seattle Times saying, these teachers, they don't want to be accountable, make them go back to work. But this was an existential crisis for Michelle Rhee, because what do you do when you're head of an organization called Students First, but the students voted unanimously to support the MAP test boycott, right? So do we listen to them then? And so this was a crisis for them, because we took away the lifeblood of their system. How do they close these schools? They look at which ones are failing based on the test scores, right? How do they deny our kids graduation? It's the test scores. How do they label our teachers failures and drive them out? It's the test scores, and we denied them that. And the last thing I want to say is that we have a much bigger vision of what assessment can be, because we face real problems in our world today. We face economic collapse globally. We face an epidemic of violence against women in our society. We face mass incarceration in our society, especially targeting African Americans, endless war, climate change threatening the very future of humanity. None of those problems can be solved by bubbling A, B, C, or D. We need to cultivate critical thinkers, collaboration, imagination, and kids that can problem solve to fix the problems that we see in our community. And that's why we launched this MAP test boycott, and why I believe Arne Duncan is right when he says that education is a civil rights movement. But if I remember right, the civil rights movement was launched with a boycott, not by billionaires.
That's right. Susie, will you talk about the Urban League's work in this area?
Sure. So the National Urban League was founded in 1910. It's the oldest community-based organization dedicated to civil rights and economic empowerment in historically underserved communities. And we operate through 95 affiliates in 36 states in the District of Columbia. Most of our affiliates are directly involved in many aspects of education work. Some are, provide after-school programs. Others partner with education assistance centers, 21st century community learning centers. Some are former teachers. Others are actually school board members. But all of our work within education is driven by our empowerment goal to ensure every child is ready for college, work, and life. One of our key programs at the National Urban League is called the Equity and Excellence Project. And this project is oriented around ensuring that the civil rights voice is at the table during conversations around education reform at both the state and local level. And at the National Urban League, we're providing technical assistance to our affiliates to ensure they're empowered to do advocacy in their state legislatures with their state governors or with their state superintendents. And that can take a number of forms. Organizing, town halls is one piece, but inviting state leaders to speak at those events and hearing from them about where they stand and letting them hear from us about what needs to happen. At the Urban League, we believe that school closures should be the last option. And if it is going to be entertained, it should not be done without full and meaningful input and participation from parents, teachers, and community members. Parents and communities don't have full access to transparent and understandable information about how schools are performing. They're basically told to look online and look at test scores, but no one's translating that for them. So how do you empower parents and communities if they don't have access to information? they also don't understand or know what types of resources and investments are being made at their schools and how they actually compare to other schools. Parents, put a lot of trust in their school systems when they send their kids to school. But they need to understand that, and a lot of them already know that their schools are not serving students the way they should be. They're not preparing students for college, work, and life. But I think it's very important for us to make sure, as community members, and one of the things we're doing at the Urban League is, our affiliates are helping reach out into our communities to ensure that we prepare parents with the information that they need, but it really needs to take place at the state level, at the district level. This information needs to be provided in clear, transparent ways.
Thank you. Lanita? School closures and school takeovers are so closely related. I wonder if you would explain what parent trigger laws are and how they impact on Black and Latino communities.
Sure. Well, in 2010, California was the first state to pass parent trigger legislation. And what that means is that schools that are consistently low performing for at least 4 or more years are enabled, or they meet the criteria for parent activist groups to come in and take the school over. Part of that process is the parents, these parent activist groups partnering with outside organizations who bring in outside organizers, and they circulate a petition. And that petition, with that petition process, they have to gather at least 51% of parent signatures from that school. Now, on the petition, there are they have to choose one of 4 methods to bring about change in the school. The first one is transformation, where they remove and replace the principal. The second one is called turnaround, in which they take at least half the staff and replace them. The third option is called restart, where they take that traditional neighborhood school and turn it into a charter. The last one is closure. Simply put, they will shut the school down. Now, those methods have not been proven to be effective. So I believe that when the law was drafted, it very well may have been well-intentioned, but it obviously is deeply flawed. And that's something that we need to talk about. Also about this movement is presented as a grassroots movement, and I am here to tell you it is not. This is a heavily financed movement, financed by foundations like the Gates Foundation, Walton Foundation, and the Broad Foundation. Parent Revolution was the organization of outside organizers who came and partnered with the parents in my community who were frustrated. And if you look at the public tax records of that organization, since 2009, they have received contributions from 18 different foundations, totaling over $14 million. Let me say that again, people, $14 million. Why is all of that money being funneled in? It certainly isn't going to the educational improvements that we would like to see: resources in the classroom, equipment for the children, professional development for staff, bringing back school counselors and nurses, and the things that we have lost in this economic crisis. So one of the other things that I want to tell you is that when these types of organizations come in, what we see is complete chaos. They rip apart our communities. They bust up relationships between parents, between students, between teachers, between families and schools, and just cause a mess all around. It disrupts the educational process, and it does nothing to promote a more collaborative method of bringing about change in the school, and it does nothing to bring those groups together, being the families, the schools, and the districts, because that is where the true power lies. That's what we need to get back to. We have to support policies and practices that link us together, because that's when true change comes about. We have to support policies and practices that will foster collaboration, not just attack a problem and blame. One of the other methods that I've seen these organizations use is this: I have all the answers, I need all the power. I'm going to caution you all, be very careful. and wary of groups that think that they have the magic bullet and that they need all of the power because of that. Educational reform is a shared responsibility. Everybody has a part to play in that. The schools, the parents, our families, and the community, because we all live and work there. And if we don't hear and listen to those stories that are going on from those teachers when the school closures happened, the families that were brokenhearted and seeing that their connection to their school has been severed and they cannot return there or they choose not to return there, if we don't listen to those things, this will continue. And there are ways to educate yourself and to become engaged. I encourage you, if you see any of this happening in your school and community, you need to be brave and ask those questions. Who are these people? Where are they coming from? What is their connection to the community? How long did they stay after a trigger was pulled somewhere else? Are they even around? 9 times out of 10, you will find out that they are not. These people are not vested in your children, but the people who work with your children are. Partner with your unions, partner with your PTA, run for school board, be a decision maker in what happens to the schools in your community. School site councils are committees that are at each school, and by law, they have to make up a majority of parents have to be on that committee. And those committees are important, and lots of people don't know about them, but those committees decide what the action plan is for a school and how that school's money is going to be spent. So I will end by saying, please don't believe the hype. What parents want for their children and what educators want for our children are more aligned than you would think. They are more aligned than these outside groups and the world would have you believe. There isn't a teacher alive that doesn't want their children to be successful, academically and personally. And remember that educational reform is a shared responsibility. No one group is entitled to it, and no one group has the answers. We have to do this together.
Thank you. So I have plenty of questions and could totally dominate the rest of the conversation with those questions, but there is a microphone there in the middle of the room. If you have any questions, please step to the microphone and ask them of the panel. I will throw in the meantime, I will throw a question back at the panel. We've talked a lot about school reform and school closures and some of the decisions that are being made. I want to talk about the children and what's happening with them. And when we look at Black and Latino children, we hear about the school to prison pipeline. We hear about very low graduation rates. They are being kept out of advanced courses, advanced placement and honors and gifted courses. They are being placed into special education at alarming numbers. Talk a little bit about what's happening with the children in maybe 30 seconds or a minute or so. Sure.
Okay. The state of the educational climate right now is having a severe impact on our students. As you said, they're being placed in special ed at alarming rates, and not necessarily because there are deficiencies or disabilities, but because of behavior problems. People don't know how to interact and relate to our children. And as I've heard it said, nobody knows what you know until they know that you care. Mm-hmm. Okay? You want to talk about students of color being kept out of advanced placement, honors, and AP courses. First of all, let's find schools where they actually offer those courses to our children. These are resource issues that we have to tackle. And they're large issues, but again, if we can partner together to address those issues and make the people who make those decisions accountable to that, we're going to begin to see movement. Because the teachers and the parents, we are not the decision makers. We are the reactors to what is being fed to us.
Yeah, I teach AP US History at Garfield High School, and I also teach regular world history. And so Garfield is a unique school in that it's very diverse, the studies show that today our school systems are as segregated as they were in 1968. So most people attend schools that are completely segregated, black, brown in one, white in the other. Garfield is actually integrated, but then when you take a little closer look, the AP classes are, almost all white, and my regular classes are almost all black. And so within the school, there's deep segregation. And that's part of the school-to-prison pipeline. But a study just came out that shows high-stakes testing is really fueling the school-to-prison pipeline. It's really the driving force, right? These new end-of-course exams that you have to pass to graduate. So forget what a teacher, a professional says about where this student is, the skills, where they came from and where they end. That doesn't make any difference. It's about what you did on that one day. It doesn't matter if you were homeless the night before or your parents just got divorced that day. It's what you do on that day that matters. And, this school-to-prison pipeline and being connected to high-stakes testing, I think, has a long and sordid history that I urge people to take a look at. Because how and why did standardized testing enter the public schools in the first place? Right? That's a story that we're never told. In fact, standardized testing entered the public schools in the early 1900s as part of the eugenics movement, a very conscious strategy of white supremacists, right, that wanted to demonstrate clearly that white people, wealthier people, native-born rather than foreign-born, were superior. And that is a very uncomfortable history to uncover, because today we're told high-stakes testing, standardized testing is the key to closing the achievement gap. But when you look at the stability of the groups that score the same as they did in the early 1900s as they do today, you can see that these high-stakes tests are part of ranking and sorting, and they have nothing to do with removing the barriers to educational equality.
Are there questions from the audience?
Thank you for all your insight and your comments. A lot of the things that you've been addressing, some of it has to do with like stopping what the negative policies are. So my question to you is, if you could create a local policy that will pass today, what policy would you create? And if you could say some around like design, implementation, like what would that look like?
I'll take this one because this is what I talk about a lot, right? We know the problems, or at least some of us know the problems, and we're quite versed on them. But the issue for me starts with funding, the equitable funding of our schools. This is an issue from state to state to state. In Illinois, we've funded schools at 89% proration for the last 3 years. We have poverty grants that have not kept up with inflation. We also have very wealthy areas in Illinois. So let's go to the North Shore in Winnetka, where there's a concentration of wealth. So the property taxes there don't have to be that high because of this great concentration of wealth. So students there each student there are funded anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000. Where the average in Chicago is $9,000. So there's something wrong with that just in the beginning. So funding, right? And I don't think that can be handled at the state level. Anytime we've made gains as black people, it had to be done at the federal level, quite frankly. It had to be something that was universal and uniform in a way in which spoke to the issues that plague black people. School funding is one of those things. One of the other things that I want to touch on is the democratic voice of parents. They need agency. In Chicago, we have mayoral control, and our mayor gets to handpick his school board. The results of that is that you have people who do not live in the communities and are not indigenous to the South and West Side, yet they make policy that impacts these people. So parents, people who love these children, that we all say we have their best interest at heart, these are the people who need to be at the ground level making the decisions. So we advocate for a democratically elected school board that represents the communities in which we're making school policy. That's another thing we talk about. The next thing we talk about is nurturing teachers, investing in their development. You cannot tell me that after 5 years you have mastered the craft. That is impossible. And it's terrible that we have policies out there that say that once you reach that 5-year mark, you matriculate into administration. So we play an awful joke on our students when we get members from alternative certification areas like Teach for America that give you 5 weeks and then send you into some of the most neediest, challenging environments to teach. That is failure from the onset. So we need to make sure we mentor our teachers, we develop our teachers, and we do not penalize them for taking risks. We do not penalize them for trying to make the classroom a better place. Funding, democratic agency by parents in the policy-making process, and then we certainly have to honor, respect, and nurture our teachers. And with that being said, you are not a veteran at 7 years. A 20-year veteran is a much-needed individual in a school. We cannot continue to push out our veteran educators out of schools. Any novice teacher can tell you that it was the veteran next door, down the hall, upstairs, or downstairs that made that school work. That is the stability in that building. Dr. Melville talked about our aunt who had everybody in that town. That means something to that town. There's a legacy there. There's a continuum of care and instruction in that.
Can I say one thing on that real quick? Because there's one policy thing that I would definitely want to advocate for when I talk about standardized testing, because there's alternatives that are hidden from us, but that are actually much better at assessing what students know. And so performance-based assessments is what everybody does when they get a PhD. At that level, they want you to be able to think. They don't want you just filling in bubbles and guessing answers, right? They want you to do research. They want you to find evidence. They want you to defend your thesis with that evidence in front of a panel of experts. And that can be reproduced at every grade level, at every subject. And it's far more holistic assessment of what a student knows. It would take resources to invest in that to make it happen, and that's a policy that I think would get at a lot of different skills that our children have.
So let's take in succession the next 2 questions and then open those up to the panel, and then we'll go into closing statements.
So my question is about parent trigger. It certainly seems to me that in a struggling school community, that one of the most important pieces would be for parents and schools to be working together. And everything that I've read about the parent trigger suggests that the outcome is often parents fighting with other parents. So I'm wondering, in your school district, what that looked like, what parents were told, was there, fighting between parents, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. That's the majority of what we saw, if not all.
And Lanita, before you answer, let me just hear the last question, and then we'll turn to you.
Okay.
Please, I just would like to add one little piece that I think should be part of the solution, and I haven't heard it today. And I've also been, wondering at other conferences, that's one area that I don't hear much. I agree with everything that has been said. I'm in support. Yes. But how about the students themselves? I'm from the higher ed, but even then, I empathize because, we're all together and we should work together. Whatever problems we have, K through 12, we end up having them. So how do we help the students themselves to see that there is a whole lot of challenges, but to empower them in the form of mentoring. Like this whole conference, I don't know, maybe I'm unaware, but I don't know if there's a session that is just about students, and they're the ones leading themselves, talking to themselves, empowering them. I'll give you an example. Puente program. I've seen it work so well at the community college level. It's about students, for students, and the successful ones come back to mentor the other ones, to encourage them. I mean, you just need to have some encouragement so that you're not overwhelmed with all the problems and challenges. And sometimes students listen to themselves better than adults. This, I'm not saying in replacement, but to augment the work of teachers and parents and the community. I'll give an example. In all of my classes, I encourage group activities, which is unheard of. They don't like it, but I tell them it doesn't matter how brilliant you are. A tree doesn't make a forest. You need to work with people. And our students of color initially will react, just being amongst other people they are not comfortable with, but you have to, because these are the people you're going to work with. So I just would like to drop in the fact that we need mentoring. We need, maybe at the community level, school level, district level, federal level, all levels, how to empower our students, just on, word of mouth, what to expect, but how to overcome this. Thank you.
Thank you. So Lanita, I wonder if you would start with Parent Trigger, and then Susie maybe answer the student empowerment piece.
Yes. There was an article, it was a great article written by the Frying Pan News, and I encourage you to Google it. It talks about Parent Trigger and who it was funded by. So it can give you some more in-depth understanding of really what the movement is, where it came from, and who's funding it. But when outside groups like Parent Revolution come in, they are very specific about who and what they target. They go into the poorer areas, and they are concentrating on high immigrant areas. And these are people who are vulnerable when they're frustrated and they want something to happen. So when they've come in, we've seen things like circulation of 2 petitions, where parents were like, I signed this, but it didn't say the intervention method that you said, so parents didn't even know that what they were signing was to convert the school to a charter. These parents felt that they were flat out lied to, misled, and harassed from people coming to their door 10 o'clock at night, knocking on the door repeatedly, even after they've said, no, I'm not interested, and them saying, you know what, oh, okay, just give it to me, I'm gonna sign it. Being threatened with deportation. And these parents went so far as to submit statements outlining specific instances and how they were lied to. Well, they just came and said they wanted better school lunches for our kids, and they were going to try to get a computer for each of our kids. Who doesn't want that? We all do. So when you hear that, you're thinking this is a good thing. But what people need to do is you really, really, really need to understand fully what you are signing before you put your name on the line. Ask to see it in writing. People who are not native English speakers, they didn't have the forms for them in Spanish. So they said, this is what it says. And they said, oh, okay, sounds good. There was no proof that what they were signing was actually aligned with what they were being told. And unfortunately, it was a court ruling who made it difficult for those parents to remove their signatures from the petition even after they were very clear about, I was not told the truth, I was misled, I was harassed. So, and that doesn't just hit at the adult level. This trickled down into the schools where parents were against teachers. Teachers were, wary and scared of parents. It trickled down into the classroom where I'm still your teacher, and I'm telling you, little Johnny, it's time to pay attention, not talk to little Jimmy over there, and them saying, you don't tell me what to do. My dad says, you're not even going to have a job next year because we're going to take over this school. Onto the playground. Students who are aligned, whose families are aligned with Parent Revolution and those outside groups, wearing the shirts and their friends are not, and saying, why didn't your parents sign? I can't play with you anymore. This is not a child's realm. They should not even be involved in that. But that is what we saw. Those were the experiences that we saw. And those parents, you can Google them. There's all kinds of interviews out there about how they were lied to, how they weren't told the truth. And when it came down and the trigger was successful, we've got children and parents and families standing outside of the school on the last day of school crying because their school is no more. There is a connection between families and schools, and when those connections are severed, you can feel and see the loss in their eyes. That is real. That is what's real.
Susie, do you want to talk about student empowerment?
Yeah, I think that, when we talk about empowering students, first of all, there's this I think, conversation, dialogue that needs to be corrected, that because students live in poverty, they cannot learn. And, you know, there's always a tendency to blame parents or teachers or students themselves because of their poverty circumstances, or, you know, folks wanting to blame the bureaucracy of the school system. But I think that it's important to recognize that there is a lot of research out there that shows that there are a number of high poverty schools that are also high performing. And we need to be able to identify those best practices. And one of the things that I think is underlying those high-performing, high-poverty schools is their culture of, we will do whatever it takes to make sure that our kids learn because we believe every kid can learn. So whether it's, you know, partnering with the Urban League affiliates in Pittsburgh, or working with your teachers' unions. I mean, we've talked about it on this panel. It takes a village. It's shared responsibility among parents, teachers, community groups like the Urban League, unions, and everybody working in concert to ensure better outcomes for students. The Urban League has, you know, after-school programs and enrichment seminars that it offers to students. What does that mean? That means we're literally placing adult mentors in the lives of young people who otherwise wouldn't have access to positive role models because of their poverty circumstances. So I think that what we're all trying to say is, yes, every child can learn. There are best practices out there that need to be considered before closing down schools. And we all have a shared responsibility in the movement to ensure better outcomes for our students and families.
So we are very close to the end of the session. I'm wondering if you would each give a minute or so closing thoughts and remarks. We'll start here, Stacy.
Oh, I get to start. Closing statements. We're here in Washington, D.C., and our president is from Chicago. And one thing that, you know, I've been thinking about is that we can't let the first Black president that this country has ever seen be at the helm of the worst school closing crisis that we've ever seen in Black communities. That is not a legacy that should be attached to his name. We must push him to understand that the policy, the intent of the policy, does not reflect the outcomes of the policy. We need to be as brave as Eric Holder was when he said mandatory minimums have destroyed communities and families. School closings, billionaire originated school reform is destroying Black communities, destroying Black students, and destroying Black families. We have to be brave enough, we have to love him enough to tell him that. That's the first thing I want to say. The erosion of Black educators cannot happen on his watch as well. We have to love him enough and support him enough to let him know that. Two, I would say when people tell you, when organizations say that education is the civil rights movement of our time, ask them to define civil rights. And then ask them to tell you what that looks like. Because we're all saying the same thing, but the outcomes are vastly different. We have to challenge the pillars of our civil rights movement, the organizations, NAACP, Urban League, to stand with people like us who are up here saying that closing a school is never okay in the Black community if you really understand our history. W.E.B. Du Bois said, out of every gain that we make in civil rights, education is by far the most important one and the one that we must hold the most tightly to. So when you tell me that closing schools and under-resourced, impoverished black communities are okay, you're telling me that you don't believe in the civil rights movement. You're telling me that you do not believe in the education of black students. You're telling me that you do not believe in the mobility of black people. 3, we must love and engage our poor parents. This is very intimidating. I am a mother, right? And my baby went to preschool this year. And I've been an educator for over a decade, and it was the most intimidating activity that I've ever undertaken. And I'm educated, I have a husband, and I have a very supportive family. God forbid I work at McDonald's and I work at Walmart and I'm a single mother and I can't be there to make the decisions in the way that I should be able to. We have to love them, we have to offer them resources, and we have to make sure that we are telling them the truth about this and offering the requisite support so their babies who are in school with my babies have the same opportunity and chance, because we all live in this world together. And we have to engage them in order to fight for a living wage so they don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs, and they can be there at parent-teacher conferences, so they can be there to do homework. Because, see, this is a whole person issue. This is not just throwing the test out, although we need to. It's also making sure that those parents can be there to help you throw that test out and they're not punching that clock. You know, I'm blessed to be able to pick him up at 3 o'clock and go back to work because I don't punch a clock. So let's be clear about how we reform education. We tackle poverty. We tackle racism. And we do it in policy, and we hold the people who we vote for, who codify this mess in legislation and law, accountable. Thank you.
Jesse, in 1 minute or less?
All right, so I've been traveling around the country speaking to a lot of different communities about our MAP test boycott, our refusal to administer this test, and it's been met with overwhelming support from communities all over, and I've learned so much from hearing from different parents and students and teachers around the country. One mother in Milwaukee told me her daughter, kindergartner, takes 14 standardized tests a year, a kindergartner, right? Where is the time left to play, right? To imagine, to learn about the problems in your community that you want to solve, right? It's all about getting ready for that next exam. And here's how you know for certain that what I'm telling you is true, that these tests are eroding public education. Because the people who are pushing these tests, the people who swear to you that these tests are the key to improving education, they don't want it for their kids. That's for your kids.
Absolutely.
Bill Gates, he went to Lakeside, just down the road from Garfield where I teach. At Lakeside, they don't have the MAP test. They don't inundate their kids year after year, 14 standardized tests. No, because at their school, they want their kids to be leaders. They want their kids to learn critical thinking. They want their kids to have time for the arts and music and science, right? But for your kids, these tests are good enough. And we rejected that at Garfield High School, and people across the country rose up and have done so too. And I think what we're going to see this year is unprecedented in American history. I think because the new Common Core is coming online, and there's a whole new set of standards that we're supposed to teach to this year, but they haven't brought all the tests online yet. What that means is we're all teaching to a set of standards and then being evaluated on a test that wasn't aligned to those standards. What that means is the problem that we identified at Garfield will be identified all over the country. And what we saw with walkouts and thousands of opt-out letters last year, I think is a very, very small beginning of what's going to mushroom into a huge movement for quality assessment, for authentic assessment, and against these punitive measures of school closures and the rest of it. And I'll just end by saying that when we took our stand at Garfield, when the students looked at us and they know that the teachers were putting their jobs on the line for a better education for them, that was the best best education that they ever got, right? They learned about how you make change. And at the end of the year, when the superintendent backed down, not only from his threat, but announced that the MAP test is now optional at the high school level. I mean, eruptions in the classroom, students fist bumping teachers, and, you know, spontaneous celebrations in the hallway. And learning became fun. It was like, I want to get to class and hear from my teacher who is trying to change this system. And that is something I encourage everyone to participate in.
Susan?
And I think, just to piggyback on your point, we need to continue that movement of parent and community engagement. I think we've reached sort of a crisis mode when we're starting to see communities or schools actually close. You know, schools that have been around for hundreds of years shutter their doors. During the financial crisis, we worried about shutting down banks because of the impact it would have on the financial system and how it would devastate the economy. Well, we can't wait for a too big to fail education crisis. In fact, we're probably there right now. What we need to be doing is lifting this issue up in our communities with our elected officials and holding our elected officials and community leaders accountable. When we close down schools, we're beginning to see the system unravel. And by then, it's too late. There are measures that we need to be taking, like at Garfield High School, that need to be taking place throughout the year, not just when we're, at crisis mode. We need parents to be engaged, communities to be engaged in all aspects of ensuring positive outcomes for students and families. We need better ways to address school improvement. School closure should be the option of last resort. There are better options out there, and parents and communities need to be a part of the process when deciding what those options are. So in rare cases when school closures are the only option, again, it comes back to making sure that communities have full and meaningful input and participation into this process so that we can ensure better outcomes for our children, so that we can ensure every child is ready for college, work, and life.
Anita?
Just a few more points that I would like for you all to remember when you're leaving this room. Firstly, please remember, do not believe what the world will have you believe, in that educators are not aligned with what you all want for your children. We are not your enemy. We are the people who are standing back to back with you, fighting off the entities and the groups that want to see your children fail. Okay? There are no magic bullets. This is not going to be changed overnight, but we have to have the strength and the courage to stick with proven methods to bring about that change that we want to see in our schools. And we need to reject those groups that say they have one answer, or I need all of the power to make this happen. Educational reform, again, it bears repeating again, is a shared responsibility. It's going to take our communities, our families, and our schools. We need to come together and support those policies and practices that do that, that bring us together. Without that, these changes will not happen, and any changes that do occur will not be lasting or effective. To be true partners in education, we have to come together and trust. It is not just about parents reaching out to us, but it's also about us as educators reaching out to parents. As the woman in the audience said, how do we foster this kind of empowerment within our youths? Well, it's very, very difficult to teach empowerment if you yourself are not empowered. So I leave you with that and just say, please reach out to the educational community, because they have long had their hand out in an effort to work together to bring about the changes that we want to see in our schools and to help our children succeed. Their lives are at stake.
Thank you all for being here for this important conversation. As Mrs. Pringle said, now it's time to go act. Thank you.